Hello. Yeah, this is a very brief lecture on Basheer. I'm just starting Basheer. So, I don't know if you have any idea about the times in which Basheer wrote his works, or at least the beginning of his career. So, his first works, short stories, were published during the late 1930s. But even before that, he was active in politics. He had published a number of pamphlets, mostly against the tyranny of the Travancore monarchy, especially on the atrocities committed by the Diwan, C.P. Ramaswamy. And his pamphlet Dharmarajyam is quite famous. He was exiled. He was on the lookout notice of the police for this pamphlet. That's an old story. So when he started writing, Malayalam literature was in a peculiar state. Fiction, especially. So who wrote fiction? Fiction was mainly the work of authors from the upper castes in the state. And they wrote in a highly Sanskritized diction, not in the kind of colloquial Malayalam that people actually spoke. So this had been right on Basheer's agenda from his earliest days. To write in colloquial Malayalam, to write in the kind of racy passions, as it is called, spoken by people in the territory where he lived, on the borders of Kochi, in Tiruvithambur, near Muvatupuzha, near Vaikom, the place which he has adopted as part of his name, Vaikom Muhammad Basheer. So when he wrote his works, he started writing in English, mind you. His Balyakala Sakhi was first written as childhood friend in English. He didn't complete it, but from what I've seen of the manuscript, it's good writing. And remember, he had left school. He was a dropout from the 9th standard. Of course, he had studied in an English school. Yes, fine. But he was a dropout in the 9th standard. He went to participate in the salt satyagraha in Malabar. He was arrested and imprisoned. And he didn't have any formal education after that. So a man who had left school, dropped out of school in the 9th standard, was writing in English, So this is not new in Indian literary history. As you probably know, the author of the controversial novel Durgesha Nandini, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, first wrote in English. And his novel was called Raj Mohan's Wife. That was in 1862. When Basheer arrived on the scene, I don't think there was a single writer who could write in English, in Malayalam, in the Malayalam-speaking territories. There were translators, and of course, there was an author called Menon Marat who wrote in English. But I believe, I must check it once again, but I believe his works came after this solo effort by Basheer to write in English. He didn't finish the novel. Before that, his friends and well-wishers advised him not to write in English, to switch over to Malayalam, because it was in Malayalam that a writer like him had to write as a matter of course. That was where his services were needed actually. Malayalam fiction was still in its developing stage, in the late 30s. After the first burst of energy at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Okay, after writers like Chandu Menon, Appu Nedungadi, later on Kara Tachida Menon, half a dozen writers, Cheruvalit Jathu Nair, Meenakshi almost stands at the same footing as Indulekha. All these novels were named after their heroines. Indulekha, Sharada, Meenakshi. So, after the first burst of fictional energy in Malayalam, for a long time, no good works appeared. And of course, like the novel, the short story was also in a state of neglect. That is where Basheer entered the scene. But he was not alone. There were others. There were writers like Karur Nilakantapilla, Ponnikara Rafi, Ponkunnam Varki, Keshavadev, S.K. Pattakad, Tagadi Shivashankarapilla, Urub, a number of writers who started writing before or immediately after Basheer did. So, the credit for bringing in the colloquial idiom for narration definitely goes to Basheer. And he, in fact, fought a virtual war with publishers to get his works published. In fact, he published his own works and went around selling them. Can you imagine? A classical writer in Malayalam, one who established himself as an icon in Malayalam, started his career by publishing and selling books from house to house. He would tie them up in a bundle, carry them over his head, and hawk them, literally hawk them. And quite often he didn't sell much, of course. Fiction was not yet a popular genre. No genre was popular, in fact, in Malayalam. So this is the very beginning when he started writing in Malayalam. And although he advised his fellow writers, especially a writer like Ponnikara Rafi, not to indulge in politics, he himself started his career as not only an ordinary Gandhian kind of political activist, but in fact an extremist. He is said to have formed a band of extremists, modeling his organization after Bhagat Singh's, the legendary Bhagat Singh's. And quite probably he was involved in a couple of actions. He was not arrested for them, he was arrested much later for sedition, for being accused of working against the country. Country meant Thiruvidampur, not India. His country was Thiruvidampur. India was not yet a political reality. So, this kind of mixing. And some of his early works are very interesting, where he makes exhortations to the people. Okay, where he calls upon the people to overthrow oppressive regimes, governments. Real revolutionary, firebrand writing in many early works. In Janmadinam, Vishappu, okay, Kathabijam. All these are, Kathabijam is a play, a very short play. In all these works, he makes this firebrand exhortations. So he was definitely into politics. Although at one point in his career, he asked his fellow writers not to indulge in politics. Yeah. So this is really interesting. And of course, we don't have any serious doubts after reading his early works that his politics was definitely towards the left. By aligning himself with national leftist leaders like Bhagat Singh. Although later on he would become a very virulent anti-communist. In a short story like the world-renowned nose, Vishwa Vikhyadamaya Mook, he would make tons of fun on the communists. Okay, calling this character called Moken, Comrade Moken, Saghao Moken. But that apart, although he was, let us say, a virulent anti-communist, but that might also have been just a pose. He had a very large number of friends in the Communist Party. He had spent time with them when they were in hiding in Kochi, when they were fled Thiruvidampur to escape C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer's oppressive policies and his witch hunt of communism. So, although perhaps theoretically he was against the communists, he had lots of friends, and he was definitely, he had incorporated their agenda in his works. Okay. As I said, many of his works call upon the people to overthrow oppressive regimes. His sympathies were with the underdogs, with workers, okay, with peasants, with poor people whom you call lumpen proletariat, not exactly workers, but who did not even have work, beggars, street prostitutes, even third sex people. Okay. With whom he had spent time during his wanderings. So LGBT, what we call LGBT, was not very new to him. He knew. In fact, the novel Shabdangal, it tells you about the life of a hijada, a third sex, a transsexual. So that was the first work in Malayalam, depicting the life of a transsexual. So what does all this mean? What am I trying to tell you? I am trying to tell you that for Basheer, experience was paramount. Life in the raw. Okay. As you read his works, you immediately realize that he is not simply conjuring his characters from a vacuum. He is not just conjuring them up from air. No, of course not. He knew many of his characters. He knew people about whom he wrote. So there is nothing outside his experience. Of course, one adds one's imaginative bits in any story, any work of fiction, but they are definitely based on experience. So this, to be in the thick of things. He was not an armchair intellectual. You know what an armchair intellectual is? One who sits back on the armchair and simply imagines or constructs his works, his characters. No. He knew many of these characters. And they were from the milieu in which he was born and brought up. Right. So, this emphasis, this centering of experience actually colored his works. Okay. And this is not the only thing. If you read the preface to R.E. Asher's translation of those 3 Basheer works, I sent you the book today. So if you read Asher's preface, you get the notion that Basheer was familiar only with the life of his own community. Asher says this is what writers in Malayalam usually did in the middle of the 20th century. They generally wrote about their community, the people who belong to their community. But Ashad goes on to say that Basheer also was such a writer. But this is not true. In fact, the hero and heroine of his first novella, you can call it a novella or a long story, Prema Lekhanam. This was written while he was in jail in Thiruvananthapuram, Central Jail, imprisoned for sedition. That is where he wrote this long story or novella, whatever you want to call it. What I am trying to say is that the characters, the hero and the heroine were not Muslims. Keshavan Nair and Sarama were the hero and heroine of the novel. So, and if you look closely at every single work of his, probably Ndupupa Koranundarnam, my granddad had an elephant is an exception. All these other books, take Pathumayude Aadu, for example, in which the narrator's family alone do not make up the whole list of characters. There are neighbors, there are people in the village, all sorts of people, and not all of them are Muslims. And he has created very vivid characters from other communities. Okay. Pongurishu Thoma, he was called Pongurishu Thoma because he stole a golden cross from a church. Pongurishu, Anavari Raman Nair, Kochu Palangan, the jailer. So, more than half of his characters are in fact not Muslims. In fact, you get a picture of Kerala, a cross section of communities and castes in Kerala. It's actually a microcosm, a small world in which you find people from all kinds of people, congressmen, communists, okay, cruel policemen, very generous, humane people, okay, people who were extremely friendly with him, good friends, good enemies. Okay. In fact, it is said that there are no villains in his works. He couldn't conjure up villains. There are heroes, and of course there are uncomfortable, unpleasant people, but you can't call them villains. So there is this kind of optimism in Basheer. Basheer thought, one of his famous statements is that Ella Strigalum Nallavara. We often talk about Nalla Strigal, Nalla Purushanmar, but Basheer would say all women are extremely good, okay, virtuous, if you want to take it to the extreme. All right. So his experiences are very vivid. He traveled the length and breadth of the country, India. He even went abroad in a ship, working as a Kalasi. Very vivid. The kind of people he met. Okay. As I said, people in the street, beggars, street prostitutes, petty traders, merchants, rich people, Sufi saints, Hindu sannyasis, all kinds of people during his forays into different parts of the country. Okay. So it is the central experience from which he molded his characters and constructed his fiction. But without vision, you can create realistic, you can simply depict realistic characters, like what his contemporary S.K. Pottekkatt did in novels like Oru Theruvinte Katha, Oru Deshathinte Katha, etc. You find S.K. Pottekkatt simply portraying characters as he found them. Basheer did not simply portray characters. He did not simply give a realistic picture of life. Instead, whatever he said is underlined by a vision of humanity. So that is why his works are significant, very important in Malayalam literature. Take Ndupupakkurananda. It has a particular project, a project of Malayali nationalism, to create a new Malayali, okay, to shed superstitions, untenable beliefs, okay, outdated customs. What it tries to make his heroine Kunjupathumma do through his hero Nizarama and his sister Aisha. Very, very viable, very contemporary project to create a new Malayalam. To create a new Malayalam again. What he tried to do in Ndupupakkurananda, a new Malayalam. Asking Kunjupathumma to speak and write in the standard Malayalam. This is actually a very controversial project. So Basheer, on the one hand, was trying to cultivate colloquial Malayalam. On the other hand, he was telling his characters to speak in standard Malayalam, to write in standard. This is a contradiction, which you can think of later. I'm not going to. This is a very controversial thing, because by insisting on a standard Malayalam, he was undercutting identity politics. So this identity politics actually strikes back. Because when the novel comes to an end, Ndupupakkurananda, we find that Kunjupathumma is still speaking in her colloquial Malayalam. Her mother is still speaking in her colloquial Malayalam. Her father is still speaking in his colloquial Malayalam. Nothing has changed. At least the Malayalam which they spoke at home has not changed. But the other projects are worth looking at. The creation of a secular Kerala. The creation of a new modern Kerala. Okay. The creation of a people who are hardworking, energetic, scientific, with a scientific outlook. Basheer himself was such a person, writer, who had developed such an outlook. So that is what he was trying to cultivate to project in Ndupupakkurananda, right? But that is not the only thing, his works show, on the one hand, the desire, the levitation towards a new Kerala, a new Malayalam, and also, on the other hand, an acute consciousness of the oppressed or the marginalized communities, mostly Muslims, the Malayali Muslim community, their life. On the one hand, they were oppressed, they were continuously harassed by from inside, their own history, past. On the other hand, they were marginalized from the mainstream. So Basheer himself is a good example. How he came up as a writer. By challenging the existing modes of writing. Okay. Now, let us talk about what I mentioned a few minutes ago. Experience, life. Okay. Now, when life becomes the source of your writing, okay, when you give paramount importance to your experience, what happens is the works are so realistic. So actually MP Paul said they are actually pages torn from life, and if you look at the edges you can find blood on it. ഇത് ജീവിതത്തിൽ നിന്ന് about ബാല്യകാല സഖി, people said, ഇത് ജീവിതത്തിൽ നിന്ന് കീറിയെടുത്ത ഒരേടാണ്, വക്കിൽ രക്തം പൊടിഞ്ഞിരിക്കുന്നു. So intense. Okay. Now, when this becomes true, there is the other question of whether what he narrates is autobiographical or imaginary. So when we come to Pathumayude Aadu, we ask this question. So, in fact, the narrator is Basheer himself, and the milieu is his own household. So he appears to be telling us about his own siblings, his house, his life, everything, with a few imaginary forays. So is it an autobiography? Is it an autobiographical work? Or is it a novel? So you go on asking this question. Okay. So the borderline between life and art is clearly transgressed, broken, violated in this work. Okay. Perhaps no other work in Malayalam does this, violating the borderline between life and art. Okay. It is one thing and the other at the same time. A text which tells you everything about the narrator. Okay. All these people are living, real living people. His brothers, his sister-in-laws, his mother, his neighbors, all these are real people. Okay. And if you watch the film called Basheer the Man, I think I've already sent it to you. Basheer the Man, made by M.A. Rahman, well-known filmmaker, writer, activist. So where he talks about his people, he says, if you go to my place, if you go to Tharayur today, you can still find some of these people. You can find Kochutresya, okay, Pongurishu Thomas Love. You can find Pathuma died just a few years ago. The heroine's owner. You can say the goat is the heroine in this novel. Some people say the goat is the hero. So Pathuma is the goat's owner, keeper. Pathuma, Abu, his younger brother, died recently. All these are real people, not fictitious characters. Okay. So by by projecting life as art. Yeah, this is very important. When we think of art as the abstraction of life, or as being extracted from life, but not life itself. Kuttakrishna, the Malayalam critic, once said, Kala Jeevitham thanne, art is life. So I don't know whether he was looking at Pathuma's goat when he said this. But in any case, here, life and art converge into one in this novel. Okay. And the vision that he unfolds in the text, I'll talk about it later. This actually undercuts the kind of artificiality that much of Malayalam fiction, not particularly in Basheer's time, but before that and after that. Okay. No artificiality, no pretense. Okay. He's just telling you a story. He's just telling you about people who he actually knew and lived with. He's telling you about a home, He's telling you about a village where he lived. Okay. So I think this is probably enough as a not very elaborate preface, but probably leading you into the novel. So please read it thoroughly. Now you have both the original Pathumayide Aadu and the English translation Pathuma's Coot. Please both. It's a very interesting book. So as you read the book, more and more ideas come to you. It's virtually an ocean of ideas, images, okay, perspectives into our own life. Thank you.